My name is Rosa Wang. Currently, I live in Oxford, England, which is the world's oldest university town. So currently, I'm an author and a public communicator and strategist. I work particularly in terms of things like disruptive technologies and transformative digital technologies. I was most recently the Global Director of Digital Financial Services for Opportunity International, which is an international organization focused on improving people's lives. So I grew up in Meridian, Mississippi, and I did my undergraduate at Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, and then a master's degree at Princeton. So in college, I studied economics and international relations. And then I got my master's degree in public policy with a focus on economics and economic policy. So what is FinTech? It's one of these terms that has only really come about just in the most recent time. It's basically a combination that says financial, as in financial services or something to do with finance, and technology. And FinTech is really about sort of the intermingling and the combination of how you offer state-of-the-art financial services with all of the innovations that have happened with technologies, including devices, including things related to data, and really how to make services with respect to finance, things about money, things about saving, investing, and so forth, but how to make that both more interesting and much more friendly for the user. So the exciting thing I think about FinTech is just how rapidly it's changing and how it sort of is very different in different parts of the world. But everyone, I think, everywhere is experiencing kind of this dynamic shift and this increase of greater technologies with finance, but also allowing the technologies to deploy services to places that, just a few years ago we wouldn't have thought was possible, but also to offer enhanced services and things that hopefully really do help people. So to give people a range of things that are known as FinTech, the area that I was working in was in developing countries, primarily in places like certain countries in Africa, for example, in Kenya or Ghana or Uganda, or places in rural India. And here you would have communities that are living on less than $2 a day. But despite that, we've seen the rapid growth of the mobile cell phone has enabled almost everyone to have access to a phone and to have access to some signal for their phone. And so what this has meant is that people who did not have a bank account before now can think about using financial services, but engaging with them through their mobile cell phone. So it's quite exciting. I think this whole area was kind of known as mobile money or mobile banking. Again, it's really only about a decade old. So only within the last 10 or 11 years have we started to see this, and started growing very quickly in East Africa, in Kenya especially, with a product called M-Pesa, but has sort of captivated the imagination, and we've seen a lot of things tied into this. Just to give some examples that outside of sort of the Africa or the India that people may be familiar with, is really the proliferation of being able to do things, again, often facilitated by devices such as the mobile cell phone. I think we see a lot of apps that allow you to pay, maybe say to, send money to your friend, maybe you went out for lunch, how do you split the check? All of these things that would have been much more challenging or involved a lot of cash, involved a lot of counting. Now those are the kinds of things that people are getting used to. What I think we will see going forward is a combination of things. One is that I think we'll start to see an increased set of services that are tailored to an individual. So it's kind of what in information space is called me casting. So once you can sort of say, okay, this person, this user, what is it that this person really wants to do? Do they need to maybe transfer some money, or do they need to check out their student loans and make sure that they haven't been late in terms of repaying, or are they trying to save up for a specific goal and helps them to track that? or helps them to improve their behavior, such as giving them prompts saying, did you remember to put a little bit away? You're saving for your first car or something like that. And so these devices, I think, can really enable a person to plan their financial life and also to hopefully help them in terms of meeting their goals, and to do so in a friendly and increasingly in a fun sort of fashion. So I think there's two things that I find really exciting within the fintech space that I think we'll see growing very rapidly. One is the combination with sort of biometrics. So the use of, we already see this, like when I access my phone, it takes an imprint of my face and allows me to use it. And then, during the pandemic, when everyone had a mask, then it would ask for this cumbersome. And then it was like, oh, now you have to type a PIN code in order to get access. But increasingly, I think we'll start to see the biometrics. So things like fingerprints, things like facial recognition scan, things like voice prints. And so increasingly, I think we're going to see, because a lot of financial services have to do with the question of, please prove to me that you are you, because they only want you to have unique access, say, to your account or to your own money. And so how do they do that? And so I think the combination with the biometrics allows for some exciting things. We were using this, interestingly, in our work, and there it wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was the case that in places we were working, for example, in rural India, quite a number of people did not have the chance to go to school, and so they were not fully literate. And so having biometric access, and we were using, for example, the fingerprint, was much easier. So they could just put their thumb on a fingerprint reader, and they would get access, and it wouldn't have to be to go through a written menu or type in a code or to remember a PIN code and that sort of thing. So I think it will allow for greater access. We're also seeing that biometrics will allow for people with certain disabilities to have access in ways that perhaps they wouldn't have before. So I think it's becoming a very inclusive technology. And as I said, to reach further and to reach audiences that previously we thought might have some challenges or difficulties in terms of accessing financial services. The second area that I think will be growing and will be where we're going to see some really interesting innovation, and where a lot of people, I think, will be focused in terms of future careers, is in terms of the combination of the services or the leveraging of the services with data. So every time you do something, whether it's to make a call or even just walk down the street, you are basically creating a profile of information about yourself. And what we're seeing is that companies and apps are getting better and better at integrating information and data so that they can provide you increasing services. So this is very familiar, for example, with e-commerce sites where they say, oh, people who purchase this might also be interested in that. So you don't forget to say purchase the additional peripherals that you might need. So the combination of data, I think, will make the ability to customize services even better. And I think we're just at the beginning in terms of the interesting sorts of developments that might occur. So my background with respect to sort of fintech and technologies in general, I think, is a little bit of a roundabout. But I basically grew up in a place called Meridian, Mississippi. I then went on to college at Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee, which is a liberal arts program. When I was in college, I majored in economics and international relations. And then I went on to policy school and received a public policy degree from Princeton, again there with a focus on economics. I always did have sort of a quantitative focus, so there was quite a lot of advanced sort of math-related things in the economics courses that I did. But part of what drew me into that was in terms of the intersection with human behavior and how these things sort of affected that. I was very interested in terms of traveling and really wanting to see more of the world. And so a lot of my career decisions were about going to places that I thought were interesting. So I spent the first part of my career, I was in New York City, living in Manhattan. And I started working in the area of investment banking, more in terms of traditional finance. And this was, of course, before really FinTech was a term or was an industry. And so I was an investment banker for a number of years in New York. And then, as I said, with the interest in travel, I then went to Hong Kong, lived and worked in Hong Kong for about 7 years. After that sort of career in investment banking, I transitioned into what's known as the social entrepreneurship, or sometimes maybe called the alternative sector or the civil society. And I began to work with social entrepreneurs, so people who are trying to solve big social problems such as environmental issues, maybe literacy or maternal health, and doing so in a very entrepreneurial way. And it was through that I started to become very interested in technology, because what I observed was that I would find social entrepreneurs that had very wide scale impact. In other words, more than 1 million people, or they were able to transfer their exciting ideas across countries and across continents, that all of them had an element of digital technologies in their work. And so they were really leveraging the early days of the mobile cell phone revolution, but they really learned to sort of lean into the technologies. And so it was through that I became very interested. So I'm what I would describe as a self-taught technologist. I continue to stay interested in terms of the developments, and I think that's a really important thing, because, as I said, the industry as such is less than a decade old, and no one really has a background or a degree directly in the things that I'm talking about, or directly in FinTech, although now there are certainly are increasing educational opportunities to learn about it. But I think that through that, I then became, most recently, I became the global director for digital financial services for a group called Opportunity International, which offers financial services across 23 countries, and was one of the founding organizations in the area called microfinance. So really working with some of the lowest income people in the world. And I found that to be both a really interesting way to take the skills and the experiences that I had in terms of investment banking and finance, combine it with the more recently learned technology, but also combine it in terms of ways that would have social impact. Yeah, so one of the stories that I like to tell, and actually it's a story in the book that I recently wrote called Strong Connections, is about a woman named Priya. And meeting her really did change my life. And that was one of the reasons I decided I wanted to kind of write about it and write the book, because I felt like her story needed to be heard more. So Priya was a woman living in some of the poorest parts of Bihar in the central part of India, in what is a very patriarchal kind of area. So she had not had the chance to go to school. And really, as a woman, is unfortunately quite disempowered. And then when I went to visit, we were visiting a place where there are individuals that work as agents, maybe out of a small shop, and basically are offering financial services. And so this man comes and brings Priya in, and he could read. So he was kind of helping her if there were documents or anything, and said, Priya wants to open a bank account. And then the agent said, okay, and takes out a small thumbprint reader, has her place her thumb on that. After it was able to read her fingerprint, the records that Priya had in terms of her national ID, which India has that system, were automatically populated into a thing and automatically generated. And basically, she was able to open an account despite the fact that she couldn't read in about 90 seconds. And I compare that to the experience that I've had. For example, I'm now living in the UK. When I first arrived in the UK, of opening a bank account, and it took like much longer. In fact, it took several weeks, if not several months, to get all parts of the sort of bank account functioning. And then to see that here's a person who did not have her own phone. She was not able to read. And yet she had an account and it was quite secure. And then to then think about why would this make such a difference in her life? And then to realize that, oh, it's through that account that she can become empowered. So she can save a bit of money when she works. She sometimes works as a housemaid, earns a little bit of extra money. She can save that. She can then, get access to additional services. So increasingly in this rural part of India, they're offering things like health services that are tied into the fact that you now have a record, you now have an account. There are organizations and charities that want to help out. And then she's also building what we call a digital footprint. She's building a credit track record. And as she saves more and more and starts to increase her financial presence, she will have a track record and a credit history that she can then build upon and hopefully then get access to things like loans, maybe investment products, and hopefully then ensure a much more successful financial future. So I tell that story partly because I think sometimes I think people think about finance or, services like that as somewhat of a nuisance because we remember when something went wrong or we remember when it was a bit of a hassle or took too long. But to really see, if you think about like, what happens if I'm not able to pay for something? How much difficulty does that cause? Or if you needed to get from point A to point B, you needed to get somewhere very quickly. One of the key things is, how do you pay for it? And so it can be very important for many people, and in the case of Priya, quite life-changing. So for people starting out in terms of thinking about like what to study or what to learn more about, or where to gain some early experiences, my recommendation, and this comes about from my own experience, so I think other people may have slightly different recommendations, but I've always been very interested in industries that change quite rapidly. So again, when I was in school, we weren't using the internet as part of the classroom experience. We weren't using, we didn't have things like Wikipedia available. And when things like mobile money and digital services came about, or the FinTech industry, everyone came from a different background. So as I said, I came from more of an economics and perhaps a more traditional investment banking background. But a counterpart of mine, a close colleague, he was a farmer in Tanzania and came from the agriculture services, but the financing of agriculture services was really important. So I think that there's a mix of it. So my recommendation would be to sort of build a good skill set. And I think that always starts in terms of a very strong grounding. I applaud very much the people that are doing the challenging work in some of the STEM topics, because I know they're not the easiest. But I think that what that does is it gives a very strong foundation for the way things are being built. I would also say for people to gain experience, not necessarily through the formal study, perhaps to the side, but definitely to gain as much exposure and experience as possible in terms of familiarity with sort of computers and perhaps coding. So if you have an interest in coding, I'd strongly encourage people to pursue that because I think it helps you to think in new and different ways and helps you to sort of organize things logically and also creates a skill set that is that's quite transferable into different ways. And I'm going to guess that a number of people, sort of a decade from now, are going to be working perhaps in companies that don't exist today, and in full industries that don't exist really in their current form today. And so we don't actually know what the shape of that is. And so the best way you can prepare for that, I think, is to have a really strong set of foundational skills. The other thing that I wanted to say about FinTech that I think, because as I said, I think a lot of people might sort of hear financial services and say, that sounds a little bit boring. But I think that can be and is becoming one of the most interesting areas because of this proliferation, as I said, the combination with digital devices, things like biometrics, but also the combination of the data. And some of the interesting trends, one is the incorporation of behavioral behavioral analytics and behavioral nudges and tools. And so you see a lot of the way that a lot of apps, for example, are constructed are to really help you improve your behavior. So, for example, like how to be a better saver or how to save towards a goal or something like that. But it really then keys in terms of the psychology. And I think we're seeing, again, behavioral economics kind of combined with things heavily in FinTech. Another thing that we're seeing that I think is quite fun is we're seeing gamification. So making things seem as if they're a game. So like a challenge for the day, or to remember something, or finding ways to interact. And I think finding ways to put people in communities of people like-minded. So I think all of these things are facilitated by some of the digital technologies that we have. And I expect that the whole area of FinTech starts to incorporate some of these things that I think are more fun, more interesting, and also weaves into a much greater community.